tube worms, for example, survive and thrive in total darkness. Extreme pressure isn't a problem. The creatures were discovered in 1977, several miles below the surface of the Galapagos Rift. They exist in water near superheated thermal vents. It's believed that these very conditions, darkness, high pressure, and hydrothermal vents, are present on Europa.
You could have hydrothermal vents kicking up warmth and nutrients down nearer to the core of Europa, and that organisms would have fed off of that material just like they might have in the early Earth.
And while tube worms might not be lurking beneath Europa's icy shell, something else could be.
Its microbial life is the bulk of life on Earth. We expect that branches of that type of life will exist on Europa, just simply because water is the key feature.
Finding it consumes scientist Bill Stone. His Depth X may answer a question that excites seekers of knowledge.
Can we have the robot behavior look for signs of life and then try to collect a sample based on what it's sensing?
Stone's baby is in its infancy. At the same time, it is futuristic and advanced. It's a high-tech toy like no other that might show our world what another is all about. Our first contact with extraterrestrial life may be on Jupiter's moon, Europa. The Depth X robot, or more accurately, Hydrobot, is being designed to ultimately think, move, and explore without help from man.
And that is all to be done by the robot itself. We're not going to be guiding it to do that. That's going to be a big step forward in what we would call robot science autonomy.
It's a real-life HAL, the star of a new space odyssey.
Where it's literally hit a button and let it dive below the surface, and we won't see it again until it tells us what's down there.
Depth X will be able to extract and analyze samples on its own as it navigates the ocean.
This little tube you see down here will pull in water samples and store them in 1-liter bags. We have 5 of them on board. But before it does that, it actually powers through a series of micro pumps over here on the left and brings it into an onboard microscope. And that microscope will take images of what's in the water down to about 5 microns. So we can see most of the typical types of microbial life from 5 to 200 microns on screen. The robot will use that to discriminate to determine if there's life, and then grab a sample.
Depth X and its systems must be made smaller to work in space. And it still must pass trials under ice flows.
We are testing this in Antarctica to make sure it all works totally under ice.
The question of life on Europa is probably the big unknown, because that would change our whole view of the universe, basically. I mean, if this little moon sitting out there in this hostile environment of Jupiter can have life form on it, that means that probably tells us that life is almost everywhere.
The science is there. I mean, I think searching for life is one of the most compelling things that we can do as not only as scientists, but as a race, as human beings.
It's a giant leap, and not just for mankind.
No, for robot kind.
Of all Jupiter's imposing features, none is more impressive than the one you cannot see. It's bigger by far than the Great Red Spot, more dynamic than the bands of jet streams, and as lethal as any killer known to man.
You have one of the most powerful radiation environments in the solar system, aside from the sun.
The magnetic field of Jupiter is the largest entity, I believe, in the solar system.
It is a bubble 450 million miles long, buzzing with electrically charged particles. It's Jupiter's magnetosphere.
The sun's sitting here putting out the solar wind, and the solar wind is charged particles of protons and electrons.
These particles flow along at 1 million miles an hour.
And Jupiter basically captures these protons, electrons, all these charged particles like electrical currents, and it has it then in space circling around Jupiter.
No word in the English language accurately conveys the enormity of this phenomenon.
The magnetosphere of Jupiter is the biggest object in the solar system. It's a lot bigger than the sun.
Comparisons are the best measure of this mega mighty wonder.
If it were visible in the night sky, it would be many, many times bigger than the moon. It's enormous, even though it's 5 times as far away from Earth as the sun is, it still would look immense in the night sky.
If visible, it would take a familiar form, a windsock. There's a rounded section facing away from the planet in one direction, with a tail flowing out the other. This windsock reaches the outer orbit of Saturn. Power plant Jupiter generates up to 10 million amps of electrical current.
The biggest planet in the solar system can conduct electricity all the way through it and around it.
This conductivity creates a phenomenon we can see when the excited charged particles escape.
Jupiter has auroras because when those particles leak in and crash into the upper atmosphere, it glows, and just as Earth has auroras.
These ghostly auroras are 1,000 times more powerful than Earth's northern and southern lights. They measure up to 1,200 miles across. If you could stand under them, they'd fill the entire sky, moving at lightning speed, 10,000 miles an hour. Jupiter's magnetic field is a monster, and it roars. In fact, it's speaking to us right now. Jupiter, the giant of the solar system, has something to say if you're listening.
We can hear what we call lion roars because it has this roaring sound. We can hear whistler modes. We can hear hiss and whistles that are going doo, doo, doo. And these are all indications of dynamics, things that are happening in the magnetosphere now.
If you find yourself driving on a dark desert highway, your AM radio might just tune in to the strange sounds of Jupiter's magnetosphere. The bursts are as short as a few seconds and as long as a couple of minutes. They come and go every hour or two.
Most of it sounds like static, but every once in a while you pick up something that sounds like a rising tone or a falling tone.
Some listeners have described audio spasms that sound like woodpeckers or waves crashing on the beach. The noise is disturbing. But just why the planet was talking remained a mystery until Voyager 2 passed through the outer magnetosphere in 1979.
Nobody really understood for a long time how those signals were generated. So that was one of the things that was on my mind when I got interested in Jupiter. What in the world was going on with these radio emissions?
It is one of the few secrets finally surrendered by Jupiter.
And that answered some questions, but it raised new ones. And I think that's the way it should be. If you don't have questions, it gets kind of boring and dull. So I think that the fact that the planets don't give up their secrets easily, or the universe doesn't, that's part of the game. It's what makes it interesting.
Jupiter keeps astounding and confounding scientists. One surprise came in 1979 when it was discovered that Jupiter has a ring. It's nothing on the order of Saturn's. Still, it's another feature that fascinates.
All of the giant planets have rings, probably left over from when the planets formed. And the moons coagulated out of the gas that was there, and then it could be a failed moon. So Jupiter's ring comes from material being knocked off of one of the interior moons. So it's dust that's collected from material that's coming in from outside moons.
The ring is slowly growing as new material flows into it. And there's a whole other side to the planet that remains a mystery. Why do these storm spots keep forming? There's the dark spot, for example. Glimpses of it were first spied in 1997. It appeared to be a huge, ominous cloud, twice the size of Earth, hovering above Jupiter's North Pole. There's a host of other spots, too.
There are other sort of smaller cousins that have come and gone. There were 3 ovals about half or a third the size of the red spot. And they sort of occupied the same latitude band in the southern hemisphere. And they'd been around since the 1930s. And amateur astronomers saw them form. And they were around till the late 90s. And 2 of them merged with each other. And then the remaining 2 merged, and now there's 1.
And it keeps transforming.
It turned red about 6 months ago, and now we're calling it the little red spot because it turned color. Now, why did it turn color is a big question. So there's chemistry going on, or some type of extra dynamics that's going on that just kicked in, and we need to start studying that.
Jupiter is a hostile and restless planet. Its giant gaseous body and violent storms make it one of the most alien environments in the solar system. Even though it is 500 million miles from us, we may have more in common with our cousin planet than we think.
I think the lesson to learn from Jupiter here is whatever's going on in our climate and our weather patterns here on Earth, Jupiter has more of it. But Earth is not an island. And there are better examples of what's going on Earth than even Earth itself.
For scientists, Jupiter is the king of many questions concerning our solar system and could possibly hold the answers.